So narrative design and interactive design, these two things coming together. Um, Narrative design is when you scope out uh, the story flow, everything about what the audience is going to take in when they first sit down to watch or listen or play something to when they walk away. And oftentimes that narrative design can even extend to when they very first hear about it. So the campaign to start building a world and telling a story and getting into the hearts and minds of an audience might begin with videos and blog posts and articles, all of which start to build up the mythos before the audience ever sits down. That narrative design, you're thinking about the very first introduction, the very first beats of a story. And think about it in terms almost like music, beats in a track that rise and fall with the tempo of a story. A narrative designer is taking an audience from that very first initial moment through those beats, bringing them up and bringing them down. This means when do you weave in a slower period in the narrative where you're introducing characters and having conversation? This is a chance for the audience to kind of relax and just take this in. When are you raising the tempo? And when are you slamming them with action or high drama or something that's incredibly high stakes conflict? So that narrative design, you are thinking about how everything connects together, each of the characters' motivations, the locations, and how time and history change them and change what a character can do in that space and what happens to a character in that space. How all of these disparate threads connect together into one solid experience, one satisfying tempo. So I'll talk about beats a lot. I think about beats as in if you're familiar with film, they've got this concept where you've got this shot breakdown, and each shot, so every scene in a film will be described in one sentence. The hero walks into a room and meets the villain. That in the film can be a 5 minute scene, but in terms of a beat, that's a one sentence description, and you'll see every single scene from a film for the entire 2 hours listed on a 2 page, 3 page sheet, one sentence per scene. Um, when I moved from animation into games, I started doing the same thing for games. You use spreadsheets instead of single pieces of paper because you need to be able to link between things non-linearly. But the same concept applies. Every scene of a player's experience, what they're doing or what they're seeing on screen, you can describe as a beat and start describing both your interactive design, so what the player does over the course of the gameplay experience, and your narrative design. You can start designing that in concert together. Um, and I think that pretty much covers it. So your concept of stringing beats together, which is what we're going to be doing in Twine. Narrative design, trying to capture this constellation of people, places, events, things, how they all connect together into one solid experience. Now, the trickiness, of course, of designing for interactivity versus linearity. So linearity, you've got your books, you've got your films, and that's significantly easier to design a beat flow for, because you can just think about that in terms of one beat follows the other beat, and it's only ever going to be this beat follows that beat. There's no this beat and then maybe this beat, or maybe this beat, and maybe that beat affects that beat later on. You don't have to worry about that with linearity. Um, and But when you get into interactivity, you get into situations where here's your beat, here's your scene, and the player can choose to have the scene go in this direction, where the heroes go left, or they can go in this direction, where the heroes go right. And very different things might happen there. So what you see instead of seeing one string of pearls beat after beat after beat, you instead start to see this really interesting branching network. It almost looks like it starts to look even more like a neural network. You see all these little branching nodes that kind of um, uh, branch out, finger out, and then they can come back together again. Um, and that's your idea of interactivity. And as much as possible, you do want to sort of weave them back into each other again. But it's exponentially more work than linear. storytelling, but it is significantly more satisfying as well, at least in my opinion. And then, so for those of you who are in UX, interactive design, watching this going, well, how does this apply to me? I'm not telling a story here. In essence, you kind of are telling a story. You're telling the user's story. You're telling a story of why the user has gone to interact with this product in the first place, what it is they're trying to achieve, what happens when they very first pick it up, what happens when they start to use it to try and achieve those goals. You are still telling stories, and they're still branching interactive stories, which is why we refer to them as user stories in agile development. So whenever I talk about beats, just think user stories, and it's going to be exactly the same concept.